Welcome. Welcome to the American Pavilion.
Thank you. Merci. Grazie.
You know, I was trying to think how to introduce you. And because an introduction is necessary, even though everyone knows who you are. And then I looked at the lead of my article about Apocalypse Now Redux. And I realized I'd already written a one-sentence introduction. And it went like this. They were giants who walked the earth in those days.
John Milius would love that. Thank you.
John Milius would, and that's really the way I felt, because this movie is so ambitious, so audacious. The vision is so large. The attempt is so awe-inspiring. And in reading Todd McCarthy's piece today, he mentioned that people wonder when the golden age of the late 60s and early 70s of American auteurism, when it ended, and he feels that maybe it ended after Apocalypse Now, that then we came into this later 20 years of less ambition and more cautious studios and fewer green lights for productions like this. Did you agree with that, or?
Well, I do feel it ends with Heaven's Gate, because it was Heaven's Gate that caused the industry to clamp down on the directors. They clamped down, I think, because they felt that costs had gone spiraling out of control, that the directors were too arrogant and, perhaps made too much money. And it was ironic because after that period of the coup d'etat of Wall Street, to take over the film business, that costs spiraled way beyond what they had ever been. I mean, think Apocalypse Now cost $32 million. What that is in today's
Less than The Mummy Returns.
Right. You could make 4 Apocalypse Now for The Mummy Returns, and indeed they did cut the director down to size, which is the most significant part. But then they elevated the studio executive, where studio executives were suddenly now people earning $40 million a year and of great importance, which is very odd to understand, and they. And then, as a third result, really fewer classics were made, which is to say movies that might be looked at 25 years later. And those that were really the product of a particular filmmaker who really, be it Pulp Fiction or Schindler's List, whichever film you might feel, Goodfellas, that is a classic. They were the result not of a studio development process, but of filmmakers who had the power to do that. So. To me, the golden age ends only when there's no encouragement to make these kinds of films. I have no doubt that there are that the talent is there if they can get the finance to go ahead and make the film. Film is a medium that requires finance, and if the finance is not there, then you can't attempt. I was lucky in that I was able to just finance it myself, sort of, but. Apocalypse would have been difficult to make even then had I not been able to do that.
Yeah. I want to take you back to 1979 when Apocalypse Now won the Golden Palm here at Cannes. And to a night when Pierre Risciant chartered a rowboat, as I recall, and took 6 or 7 film critics out to your yacht. I think it was a motorboat maybe, but it was a very small craft. And you were very worried. And everything kind of depended on this screening. Isn't that true? Because the movie had been rumored to be in trouble, and you had been shooting in the Philippines for most of a lifetime, and people doubted that you had no idea what you were going to show them. And I remember that night so clearly, but did you come here to Cannes more or less thinking that this is the last roll of the dice and it's got to make it here? And
yeah, no question. I mean, for all the things I was scared, because not only was it a kind of career and artistic judgment about to be made, whether or not the film was as much a mess that people had said it was, and also I had a tremendous financial issue in that, this famous winery that was up guaranteeing the film was not just some summer house. This was our home where our children went to school and where we lived. So I was, to say the least, scared. And I only agreed, I only said, let's show the film at Cannes unfinished as a necessity, because the rumors of how much in trouble it was were so now filling the papers that I felt my only defense was to just show it and hope that people said, oh no, it's not such a mess. And so it was really, in a sense, that Cannes saved Apocalypse Now, and me momentarily. I did go in debt right after that with One from the Heart, but that was another chapter.
You kept jumping back and forth into the fire and into the frying pan, as I recall.
Well, I thought that we were pretty sure that Apocalypse was going to wipe us out, so I thought, well, maybe I'll make a kind of happy little, movie that will earn money and then we can be saved. And then, of course, One from the Heart took its own journey, and I had a lot of theories as to what I was doing, and the what was supposed to be the medicine was all, Apocalypse did fine and was very successful in its original form, and then it was One from the Heart that really put me away. So
There were, I remember when you came here, you referred to the movie as a work in progress, and some of the press, especially the French press, were offended by that, and some people felt, remember you shared the Golden Palm with The Tin Drum, and a movie that, in my opinion, has not held up quite so well. There's no real demand today to bring that back to the Palais, but in any event, some people felt it cost you 100% of the Palme d'Or because you called it a work in progress, and also, as I recall, rather rashly referred to the showing here as the out-of-town tryout.
Well, I come from theater, and in theater, the out-of-town tryout is kind of a wonderful part of filmmaking. We had never shown the film really to an audience. It wasn't finished. It was just a kind of act of daring do to show it. And, I had an older brother with a great literary tradition, and to me, work in progress was a phrase that James Joyce always used in regard to Finnegan's Wake. So I was like taking a very lofty literary phrase and using it. And it was true, the film wasn't finished. And, obviously, the good reception at Cannes and the honor of sharing the prize with Volker Schlörndorff greatly helped us, and we were able to finish it pretty much in that version. But it is sort of a funny fairy tale to think that I brought it here as a work in progress, and then I finished it 22 years later and brought it back. It's kind of amusing.
If you had been able to do everything you wanted to do with the film before Cannes 1979, would it have looked substantially as it did yesterday in the Palais?
Well, the big factor, as you know, is that when you make agreements with distributors who give you financing backing to make a film, more or less they want you to make it the length that is good for their territory. So we had agreed it would be in the area of 2 hours. And today they put that in the contract that if you don't make the time that they specify, they can take the film and cut it to 2 hours for their territory. So there really was no option to consider this version then, this being 3 hours and 20 minutes. Had someone said, Francis, I always dreamed that it would be like that people would say, Francis, what movie do you want to make? Make any movie you want to make. But, they don't say that to anyone. I mean, none of my colleagues, including the wonderful Martin Scorsese, do they come and say, Marty, make any film you want. We're always there with hat in hand trying to say, oh, can we make a film? And they always want us to make a movie that's like Taxi Driver or like The Godfather or something that they know is tried and true. So there was no option then. If there had been, this would have been the version.
But as it was, the final version that we saw then in August of 1979 was more or less the final version that was going to be, given the realities of distribution.
Right, definitely.
So this is essentially a print made possible by home video.
Yeah, very significant. The DVD has been such a friend to the filmmakers, not only to the filmmaker but the film audience as well, to give something that you can have of that quality of sound and picture, and on the new possible formats for home, even on a big screen. And it was only because of the DVD that we undertook this, because we never expected that it would get a release in theaters. Only recently did Miramax and Canal Plus and Pathé agree to put it in theaters. So when Walter and I were working on this, we thought it would end up as a DVD, and we're thrilled to be given the chance that the DVD made possible.
Before I talk about this version in a little more detail or ask you about it, I want to just maybe see if we can settle one thing that has been kind of dogging this film for a long time. When you were here in '79, you said something about, and what you said has always been in contention, you were not sure about the ending, or you didn't know if it worked, or you didn't know if you had the right ending. And then you showed one version in the old Palais and another version on the Rue d'Antibes with different endings. And then I remember I was out at your house in August of that year, and you said I should have never mentioned anything about the ending because I was talking about very minor things. And of course, all the critics who went to see the movie spent the last hour saying, has the ending started yet? Is this what he's talking about? Does it mean everything with Brando, or does it mean... And your position was the movie was substantially exactly the way you wanted it, and it was a very minor thing that got blown completely out of proportion. Maybe you could explain that, because I think there are still people who don't understand that.
Yeah, it really never had more than one ending, and if to the extent that I said about that, it might have been the level of whether we cut it off a little earlier or let it gone on a little longer. I'm not even sure. The real issue of the ending, though, I believe, is this: that the movie, the Kurtz, the Angkor Wat temple that we built there in the Philippines, we really built that. And it was not safe. It wasn't built to be there permanently. So we were required by the state to remove it. And we thought, well, let's blow it up since we have to remove it, and we'll get a lot of cameras and we'll shoot it. We'll shoot it with infrared film. We'll shoot it, high speed in every way, and we'll get beautiful footage, and maybe we can use it in the movie. When the film came out, as it was last night, the exact correct version, there are no credits. It's in a program. But when the film, even now, is going to be shown in many theaters, they can't afford to give every theater a program, so they'll put the credits on the end. That happened in this occasion. And when we put the credits on the end, we thought, well, why don't we use that beautiful footage of the temple blowing up? It would be very decorative and nice, And however, because there was in the story the idea of an airstrike, everyone felt that the ending with the temple blowing up meant he called in the bombs and blew it up and probably killed all those people, which was something I didn't want. So I said, oh my God, that was a terrible mistake. No one takes it as a decorative graphic. They take it as another ending. So we removed it and put it on black and put the words. Well, because of that, to this day, the notion of these two endings persists, and then that's why we removed that. And on the DVD, you can see those explosions with some beautiful music, and in fact, my voice telling the story of the two endings. So, to set the record straight, there really was only one ending. And partly it was because at the end of the story, when Willard sort of goes through this enormous ritual sacrifice of Kurtz and sort of becomes the new leader, I had him throw away the weapon, and if you notice, they all throw away their weapons, and it was my hopeful way of saying that it could end not with a bang, but with a gesture of peace and of a hope that we will, not always have war through hundreds of years into the future. So the ending of the explosion was something that went against that more pacifist desire, and that's why I wished it wouldn't be.
And you, by just being sincere and open and honest, you let this genie out of the bottle that distracted, I think, a lot of viewers and critics because they didn't know what you meant by it.
It's hard to know what will stick, though. Certain ideas just get,
It's like a meme that just will not go away.
yeah, there's this idea, I guess it's in the notes, that we were looking for a place to put the French plantation, which I don't recall because the French sequence happens after Larry Fishburne is killed and they bury him, so it's the only place it could be. But many people have said, oh, is it true that you were going to put it earlier or after? So,
Well, let's talk about the additional footage. Could you enumerate, although we all kind of know what's new, but if you could just kind of talk about it in terms of what it is and why it was sort of left out.
well, the
Well,
main
time is why it was left out, but anyway.
Yeah, time was the big reason, but also the idea that we thought to be successful, which is to not be designated a flop and to earn our money back, that it had to qualify as a war action adventure film. And so we also thought that perhaps some of the things we took out were bizarre or sort of left turns. They fall into 4 categories: the French plantation, the Marlon Brando reading the Time magazine, the the Playmates, the young girls, and in that rainy medevac, and I guess those are the big ones. And then there were many sections that were just lifted to make the film move faster, which is so stupid that we did it. But the consequence of the napalm of the surfing, the idea that in order to let these boys surf, he orders the napalm to be dropped, which ruins the wind so they can't surf, which is sort of a comment on so many of the things that even were done in Vietnam. So the French sequence I always loved because it gave a historical perspective, and also it supported the idea that when they leave the bridge, they leave civilization behind and they're going back in time. At first they go into the 50s where the ghosts of Indochina War are still there, and then when they leave that, they go into prehistoric time, which is where Kurtz is. So I very much like the French plantation, but because of the way we worked with the French actors, I like to rehearse, and I always ask the actors to suggest, and so they brought up many political issues of the real things that were argued about in those days that they heard in their family. And so I kept writing the script using their suggestions, and the script got longer and longer, and the French sequence became quite a long sequence. And I said, well, maybe we can make it shorter. But every time we made it shorter, it seemed to lose its point. And so it didn't work, and then ultimately we cut it out. So Walter Murch, who hadn't worked on that part of the film when he was the original editor, because we had more than one editor, he said, I'd like to just cut that scene as though I'm just getting the film from the director. And he cut it in its full sense, and it seemed to be a very interesting historical perspective and show how so much of the French experience had 15 years before, they had students marching in the streets and protests just as America had, and America hadn't learned from such a clear example. Plus it had the added notion of colonialism that really the French were fighting in Indochina because, their grandfathers had settled these plantations, and it was really, they thought of themselves of living there. It wasn't just fighting for some empty political chess game that the leaders had done. So it seemed like the French sequence had the value of that perspective. And also, the sequence with Aurore Clément, where her husband, she had been widowed, and no doubt she smoked this opium pipe with her husband. She sort of reinvigorated him or brought him back to life after the incredible horrible experiences, that she does that to Willard, and it gives, in a sense, Willard and the audience a chance to rest and be soothed before they go into the most bizarre sequence, which is the Kurtz sequence. So the French sequence seemed to be valuable, but in the early cut, when it was short, it was just another episode to get through before yet another demanding one, and so we eliminated it to, in film we have the theory, we have many theories, some of them contradict, but one theory is that whatever you remove from the film makes what's left better. And often that's the case. But I always tell my kids that when you cut out anything you want, throw it on the floor, and just try to cut to the point, because it will, on the floor, it will say, put me back in, and the ones that nag you the most, you put back in.
At the time, we were so filled with stories about the production. All the lore about Brando, for example. Now, seeing it again after 22 years, all that's forgotten. It's all water under the bridge. Brando's performance seems so strong to me, and so just on the right note and just handled right by you. And all of the gossip about, how much he weighed, or, every time Brando does anything, there are a million stories from the set, had all just faded away, leaving this pure and great performance. How did you feel seeing it again? Because you had to work with Brando and deal with him and so forth.
Well, he's an extraordinary man, and beyond as the roles of films that we know, just what he talks about and the way his mind thinks. And it's true, I could tell you so many stories, I don't want to overstay my welcome, but the truth of the matter is Marlon is like a kid, and he's very lazy, and he doesn't like to work, and he also gets embarrassed, and he gets stage fright. So when he arrived, he was very big, and I immediately, in film you always have problems, and part of your job as a director is to see how you can make the problem be an advantage. So I immediately suggested, well, Marlon, why don't you play it as this big fat guy and have one arm around a beautiful girl and another with a mango that you're eating, and show him as a man who has surrendered to the jungle and to the lusts of life. But Marlon is very shy about his weight. He says, no. He says, I can't do that. I don't want to be like fat and stuff. I said, okay. Well, I couldn't have him be, as it was written, a kind of Green Beret colonel in uniform, because, where would he have gotten the uniform that could fit him? So the idea I had in movies, very often you're looking at the actor from the waist up. And in a movie, if you're broad, if you have big shoulders, even like Roger, if you're broad, that in your mind, you assume him to be a big man, a giant, not necessarily heavy. So I thought if I shot him in that attitude, and then when I showed him full, had a double who was like 6'6", it would make Kurtz be like a giant man rather than like me, So that was the philosophy I took as a solution. The second issue was that Marlon, I wanted it to be like the character Kurtz in the book. And Marlon immediately said that would never work. So when an actor has a problem with the script, you talk about it. So every morning I would go into this houseboat that they had for Marlon, like a trailer, and I would talk about, since that the Kurtz idea from the book wouldn't work, that perhaps this would work or that work. And Marlon talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. And they'd knock on the door and said, okay, everyone, what should we do? It's time for lunch. I said, go to lunch. And then we talk and talk, and all through the night, even they say, knock, knock, it's time to go home. And we did that for 5 days. And I realized suddenly, Marlon only had a deal for 3 weeks, and what he was doing is he was getting out of working. And he was conning me, and that at the end of the 3 weeks, he was just going to leave. So finally I started getting, well, why won't it work? And, blah, blah. One day, the 5th day, I come in and I'm astonished. There he is, and he's cut off all his hair, which is the image of Kurtz from the book. And I said, Marlon, what happened? They says, you're going to do it like Kurtz. He says, yeah. I think doing it like Kurtz is the best way. I said, but you told me that wouldn't work. You said you read the book and it would never work. He says, well, I didn't read the book. I said, but you told me you did. He said, well, I lied. So that's like what it is to work with Marlon, but his instincts are so great that, and many of our talks led to opinions and ideas that I would write down, and just as I did with the French people, I would prepare like the basis, really sort of from some of his monologues, and that was the basis of really those scenes he had. And Vittorio finally said, Francis, look, let's just get him up there in the dark, and we'll do something with the light. And Marlon immediately got it, and he used the light in his first scene as like a prop. You know, he kind of poked his head out a little. You saw a little, then he poked it in, and then he put the water. And so there's sort of a method to his madness. And I would have to say, for all of his shenanigans and stuff, that it was what he brought to it that led to the way he did that performance. And in his instinct, he knew that it had to be dished out in little razor slices, and that it had to be done with great mystery. And so I do think he did a wonderful performance, and that the ending, which, as you know, which was considered sort of like very obscure, that was the right ending for Kurtz, and the sentiments that he gave about that horrible story of the children with the polio arms, and
that story is the fulcrum of the entire movie.
Yeah, I mean,
showing that their will is greater.
Right, and
it says it was brilliant. It's genius.
It was. That's all from Marlon. I mean, we work as the way you do with actors, where you
even the story about the inoculations is from him.
No, that was one of the things that in those 4 days, you know, in a funny way, Marlon was stalling, but he didn't know how to do it in truth, and through those talks, in a way, he came to know how to it. So that's the artistic process, really. And he evolved what he needed in order to do that performance. And he's
it's
to be
just
commended.
right, because when you get to this legendary character in the Heart of Darkness, you really don't want to just have him standing there like a person who exists as in the same dimension as the other people in the film. He has to emerge out of some other kind of idea, I think.
Well, he also knew, Marlon even said to me that he says, you've painted yourself into a corner, haven't you? And what he meant was that as I made the film Going Up the River, I was making it more surreal, you know, with the colored smoke and the style it had, and by making it more surreal, a normal Guns of Navarone ending wouldn't have worked anymore. So I had painted myself into a corner, and I didn't know how to get out. And he knew that I had done that, and I think, you know, he likes to kid around and stuff, or he's a big practical joker, but I think that early process of trying to find the ending was his working really at it.
You mentioned at the press conference that your wife's book on the experience was not precisely or exactly the final word. I'm sure you would probably think that Hearts of Darkness also was not the final word, but it is a great documentary about your experience.
Without a doubt.
What one gathers from all of the documentation on this project, whether it's all accurate or not, and whatever point of view it comes from, is that it was about as hard a shoot as human beings ever went through, and that it damn near killed you and everyone else, and by the end you were in despair. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I was in despair. I was very scared. You know, it was also your average run-of-the-mill midlife crisis.
You're only in your midlife now.
Yeah. you know, another factor was I had never smoked in my life, but because I was on the boat, the Italians were smoking. I started to smoke, you know, tobacco cigarettes, and I found that was the most addictive kind of thing I had ever experienced, and I think that really had me, you know, when you're what was I, 30-some years old, never smoked a cigarette in my life, and started to smoke Camel cigarettes. That had a factor, but just like Marlon, in going through a process that you don't know the answers, that's work also, and I think I was doing the same thing. I only say that about my wife's book because she wasn't there all the time. She was there half the time, so that's like half the story. You know, my feeling is it wasn't quite just that I wasn't some out of control person. I'm not an out of control person. I consider myself a pretty logical person, and there was method to my madness in everything I was doing. And it's always so easy when someone sees part of it to say, oh my God, what's going on? But if you should see the other part, then you see what's going on.
Another performance that seemed much more correct, or just seemed just right to me now, was Dennis Hopper's. And at the time we saw the movie originally, I think there were all kinds of echoes of Easy Rider. And it was almost like his drugged out photographer was, you know, the guy from Easy Rider making a guest appearance in this movie. Now, everything is faded into the past enough that it can be seen as an original character, and it seems like just right. You need somebody to explain things, and you don't need Walter Cronkite there to explain it. You need somebody like this who has, you know, found his own madness in Kurtz's jungle.
Well, you know, interestingly enough, he was hired. Dennis Hopper. Remember, there's a character named Colby who was supposedly a Green Beret officer sent up before Willard, and then Scott Glenn, plays that part, Colby. That was the part Dennis was hired to play. But when he got there, I saw Dennis, and you know, I didn't have the script with me when I made the film. I just had this paperback copy of Heart of Darkness, thinking that whenever I was in a scene or a situation, I would double check Heart of Darkness to see what wisdom Joseph Conrad would give me, you know. And in Heart of Darkness is a wonderful character, if you remember, the Russian, who is this character very much like the role Dennis Hopper plays. And so I decided not to have Dennis play Colby, but we literally put that Montagnard jacket and put the cameras, because I had heard of, I think it was Errol Flynn's son was a photojournalist in Vietnam and was supposed to be an extraordinary character. And we sort of fashioned the Dennis Hopper character out of nothing, right, out of Dennis and out of the Heart of Darkness. So that character hadn't been in the script and pretty much was, you know, when I say improvised, what you do is the actors take a shot at what they're doing, and then at night I would go home and try to organize it into a scene and bring it back and, you know, slightly more defined. And so that character was done that way.
I have one more question, and then I'm sure everybody else does too. I reckon that the attack on the village with the helicopters and the Wagner and so forth is just simply one of the best movie scenes ever made. I mean, it just comes together as just stunning. You sit there in awe. On paper, did it look that way? I mean, you must agree with me that scene really, it does it. It does whatever a scene can do.
Well,
that scene does it.
It seems astonishing to me that I thought at that time that, oh, well, that's no problem. We'll just do that, you know. Now that I look at it, I say, my God, how did we attempt it, you know, because obviously we had to build the entire village, and then we had to destroy it with these helicopters and photograph it all with people. So it seems to me a feeling I have about the difference between being young and old, or the young filmmaker and the old filmmaker. The young filmmaker is very insecure, you know that. Very insecure, very unsure of himself, doesn't think that he really has the goods. The old filmmaker is very insecure. The young filmmaker is stupid, which is to say, doesn't realize that how difficult some of the things that he's going to attempt is. And the old filmmaker is experienced. And to be stupid is a great advantage, because that sequence could not have been done by someone who wasn't stupid, you know, who wasn't, you know what I mean? Doing something that wasn't really practically, you would have knocked that down and made that simpler. And in answer to your question, that was John Milius's scene in the original script. It was a dazzling scene, even in the script. He based it on true information that they would play music. They call it PSYOP, psychological operations, to kind of unsettle the people and make them fear what was about to happen. And it was a dazzling scene in the script. But of course, when you direct a scene, you go in and you make many vignettes that you invent, which are not in the script, like, you know, the fact that there's a Vietnamese school and the children hear the music and run away, or that there's a helicopter evacuation that a sapper blows up. In other words, what I do is I go in with little index cards, sort of like with The Godfather. You have a wedding, and you're going to introduce the characters, but then you make a lot of specific vignettes. Oh, there's a little girl is going to be dancing on the feet of the uncle, or And so you have these index cards, and then you all meet and you say, okay, well, let's do the index card 3, you know, and then you stage, and then when you put it all together, you have the points of different interest that makes up the thing. So that's how you do it.
One more question. I remember talking to Carl Malden about On the Waterfront, and he said there was a scene in there that was the hardest scene he'd ever been asked to do as an actor, and it didn't even involve dialogue. If you remember, he's in the hold of the ship and somebody throws a beer can at him and hits him on the head with it. He said the hardest thing he ever had to do as an actor was to act as if he didn't know he was about to be hit with a beer can. Now, Duvall has to act as if he doesn't know that bombs are going to be going off right behind him and all around him. I mean, because he's totally oblivious.
Right.
In other words, he's impervious. Nothing can hurt him.
Right.
But as an actor, I mean, the character, that's
Yeah.
fine for the character to be impervious. But for the actor to be able to keep that tone exactly even when you're blowing up explosives
Right.
15 feet away from him must have been kind of difficult.
Well, actors love to work that way, which is to say, from the script, there was the idea that that kind of guy probably will die in bed as an old man, that he's not going to get hurt. So we discussed, and as a decision, we said, look, there's going to be lots of bombs and explosions going off. You play it like you don't even notice it, and then everyone else will be, cowering. And, one thing, of course, they were going off, and as a deliberate decision, he was not paying attention. But don't forget, in the movie, a lot of the real sound is put in later, so some of those explosive sounds maybe weren't as loud. But it,
the flames.
No, but it showed the discipline that he had as an actor. That was his intention, and he did it. I'll say one little quick anecdote, if I may. We were in big trouble on the movie right from the beginning. Some of the history. Another actor was chosen, and very good actor, and I made the decision that it wasn't the right casting, and we changed that. I was really in the deepest worry that I could be. And the day that I had the first hope was the scene where we had 3 or 4 cameras going, and the idea was that these 3-4 jets were going to fly over and drop these canisters, and then a mile of napalm was going to go off, and they were going to play a scene, and this was all going to happen once with 3 cameras, moving on dollies and stuff. So we attempted this, and we only had the ability to do it twice because that napalm drop, that was a mile of flame, took the way it was done. I won't bore you with it, but we only had the chance to do that twice. So when we were ready to do that, they had to send the jets from some other Air Force base, and they had a time, and they had to drop it, and the actors had to all be ready, and the bombs had to go off and not kill anyone, and they had to play a scene. And so we did it, and I watched, and it all happened, and the flame went off, and I realized that we didn't have to do it a second time, that the one time sort of had worked, and that was the moment in my heart when I said, I'm going to get through this. Just, how like the first time I had the feeling it would be okay. Thank you.